Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. We will begin with chapter 29, verse 45. Chapter 29, verse 45. Again, there are very understandable psukim, very meaningful psukim about the Mishkan, about the relationship of God with the Jewish people and how that's reinforced by the Mishkan. But it's just an interesting exercise to think about. But what exactly does that mean? That's a meaningful phrase. That sounds like an important phrase. It sounds very nice even, but what exactly does it mean? So you have different ideas in the Mefarshim, but I just want to look at this pasuk for a moment. V'shachanti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. God says, I will dwell among the Jewish people, v'yisi lohem le'lokim, and I will be for them as a God. And the implication, of course, is that there's something about the Mishkan that makes this pasuk more in effect than it would be if there wasn't a Mishkan. Sforno on pasuk memhei. V'shachanti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. I will dwell among the Jewish people. L'kabel avodasam b'ratzon. To what it means, I'll dwell amongst them, is to accept their service with favor. V'lishmo es tfilasam, and to hear their prayers. So the fact that they have this Mishkan, the fact that they're putting all this effort into the Mishkan, the fact that they're doing all the service in the Mishkan, God says, I will look favorably upon their korbanos, their sacrifices, but their prayers in general. Vayisi lahem le'lokim, and I will be for them a God. Manig inyanam bilti emtsai. I will conduct their matters without any intermediaries. Ume osos hashamayim lo yechtu. They shouldn't be afraid from different signs in the heavens. Liyosam nichbadim lefanai yosim and hashamayim. You know, there's an idea, again, we're not talking about the horoscope from the daily newspaper, but there is an idea in the stars and what the stars hold. There are various ideas like that. We've had in Sefer Shmos, some of Paro's stargazers told them things. We have all kinds of things in the Midrashim and Sefer Bereshis. So it could be that there's something in the stars that tells you this or that. God says they shouldn't worry about that. The Jewish people shouldn't worry about that. I will be to them a God. We're playing by my rules now, and not even my regular rules. I'll be very directly involved with them. And that's the point. And they need to understand that they're more precious in my eyes than the heavens themselves. The bottom line is their conduct is what happens to them is going to be based on how they live their lives. And that, says God, is something that's very important to me. And that's why the Jewish people will always endure, because their circumstances will not be dictated by the stars. It's interesting. We don't have that much of an understanding of what it means, the stars. So I'll tell you, I don't remember if I've shared this with this group ever before. I was once speaking with a doctor, and we were talking about the odds of a patient who has a certain condition surviving, having a full recovery, whatever the exact context was. And I'm just not using names because I don't know if I'm getting the story exactly correct. The doctor said to me, the odds were very, very slim. Okay, whatever. So you dive in, obviously the odds do inform decisions, as halachically that's certainly the case, but okay. Then he said to me, you know what a rabbi once told me? I said, what? He said, when we say Ein Mazel Yisrael, that the Jewish people are not dictated by, we would loosely translate it as luck. What it really means is the stars and the like. A rabbi once told me that applies to medical data as well. In other words, that if something is very unlikely, so the Jewish people hold a very special relationship with God. And that, again, we still have to use our heads, but in the end of the day, even if something is very unlikely, we should be more optimistic that it can happen if it's for a member of Klal Yisrael, because we play by a whole different set of rules. Just an interesting thing. How exactly that applies to the practical realm, I'm not sure. I mean, we have a concept, Ein Somchen al Hanes. We're not supposed to rely on miracles, but if if it makes sense to do this anyway, and just the question is, how hard should I really daven? How much should I really emotionally invest myself in a positive turnaround? In Mazel Israel. I thought that was something maybe we could relate to it a little bit more in our modern day context. Okay, let's move on to chapter 30, verse 10. Now we're talking about the inner altar. Last week we discussed the outer altar, and this week we discussed the inner altar. Generally speaking, sacrifices are not brought on the inner altar. Generally speaking, sacrifices are brought only on the outer altar. But particularly on Yom Kippur, there is a different avoda done on the inner altar. And the verse reads, V'chiper Aaron al karnosav achas b'shana. And Aaron will bring atonement on the corners of the altar once a year. Midam chatasa kippurim, from the blood of the sin offerings of Yom Kippur. Achas b'shana yichaper alav l'darosechem. Once a year, he'll apply blood to the corners of the mizbeach, of the inner altar. These will be through the generations. Kodesh Kodashim Hu Lashem. This is a very sacred thing to God. Okay, if you look at the Kli Yakar on this pasuk, this is actually very similar to a comment the Kli Yakar made that we read last week, but this bears repeating. Aaron will bring atonement on its corners once a year. And if you remember, we discussed last week that keren is the word used for the horn of an animal. So kind of something protruding up. For all you people who haven't seen Jews much before, I don't have a horn here, but something protruding up. And so the point is, at each corner of the Mizbeach, there was something coming up from the corner. L'chaper al mashenemar al tarimu lamakom karnechem kimavur lamala b'mizbach hanachoshes. That this is part of the atonement. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. You shouldn't allow your horn to raise up too high. And this specific, so many times when we sin, it's because of a spirit of haughtiness in the moment, whether it be in our human interaction, we maybe get haughty with other people, whether it be even with God, we sometimes forget how fortunate we should feel to have a connection with God, to have the mitzvah. So we say, yeah, it might be true that there's this mitzvah, there's that mitzvah, but I really want to do X or I really want to do Y. Who cares what God says? That's a certain sense of haughtiness. Specifically on Yom Kippur, we're cleansed from sin like the angels. And the soul is so greatly purified like it was at the beginning of time. So that's why one day a year, Aaron HaKohen can bring the blood from the sin offering on the inner Mizbeach. Normally, the offerings, such offerings belong on the outer Mizbeach, because who are we to bring our sinful relationship, and particularly something about our sins, into God's inner sanctum? But on Yom Kippur, that we're so pure that it's a day designated for our forgiveness and our cleansing, on that one day a year, we can reconnect with him in the ideal manner. Obviously, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, at least right now. And even if we did, it could very well be that no one on this Zoom will ever be the Kohen Gadol. It's distinctly possible. But it's an interesting thing to think about with the perspective towards Yom Kippur, because it's very easy to think of Yom Kippur as a day of guilt, as a day that focuses on how crummy of a person I am. It's very easy to think of Yom Kippur as a day of discomfort, the shoes, the fasting, this, that. But in the big picture, it really seems to be that Yom Kippur is a day of coming close to God. Okay, that's all I have for the standard Mefarshim that we see. What I'd like to do now for the last few minutes is I'd like to read to you from the Sefer HaChinuch. Every now and then we do the Sefer HaChinuch. Generally coincides with my having not that many Mefarshim to work with in a given week. But the Sefer HaChinuch is a very interesting commentary that discusses at least a possible reason or perspective towards a mitzvah. And what I wanted to see this morning is his description of why there's so much importance placed on the garments of the Kohanim, the garments of the priests. Again, as we discussed, I think a little bit last week, it's somewhat counterintuitive. We spend a lot of our time talking about how we're not into superficial things, we're into spirituality, it's what's inside that really counts. And all of a sudden, we have this tremendous focus on this is the color, and this is the length, this is the material. Wow, who cares? So this is a mitzvah tzadi test in Sefer HaChinuch. Mishrashe mitzvah, from the foundations of the mitzvah Yisod HaKavu Alanu, there's a basic thing that we know. Ki ha'adam nifal lefi pulosav, the Sefer HaChinuch says this many times, that a person is impacted by his actions. V'achareim machshavosav kavanosav, and one's thoughts and feelings and intentions frequently follow one's actions. The modern day version of this is fake it till you make it. I think that's the popular phrase. If you want to be something, keep on acting in that way, and it might impact you. That's the watered down version of what the Sefer HaChinuch is talking about. V'ashliach ha'mechaper tzarich lahaspis kol machshavto v'kavonaso el ha'avodah. This person who's serving in the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash, and it could be he's representing an individual, it could be he's representing the people. Every moment that he's serving, he needs to have absolute focus on what he's doing. He's doing a very holy thing. And again, it's bigger than himself. He's representing another person or a whole group. Therefore, it's appropriate to wear unique garments for this service, to be in a special uniform. Wherever he looks on his body, miyad yaniskar umisorer belibo lifnei mihu oved. He will immediately remember and be aroused in his heart and remember to whom he's serving. Now he says something very interesting that I think will be meaningful for at least some of us. V'zeh ke'ein tefillin. This is like tefillin. Tefillin, so a man has a responsibility to wear tefillin every day that's not a Shabbos or Yom Tov. Shenetztavu hakol laniach b'ktsas haguf. She'elizikaron machshavas hakasher. So the point is, and by the way, in ideal times, men would wear tefillin all day. So we don't think we're up to that today, because you're supposed to have a certain respect for tefillin while you're wearing it. But at least during davening, the point is, like you look down at your arm, oh my gosh, there's tefillin. You feel it on your head. And the Sefer HaChinuch says part of the significance of tefillin is it helps a person keep focused. He's not just sitting around. Oh my gosh, I'm wearing tefillin. It must be that I have this special mitzvah to really be focused on what I'm doing now. So he says it's a similar thing for the Kohanim in the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash, but it's even more extensive. It's not just on the arm or the head, it's all of the body. The Kohen wore tefillin too, so what do you need this for? Because this is so significant, he did even more than wearing tefillin. Such an interesting idea. The truth is, we actually have a pretty good sense from Debbie's good background. Thank you very much. But the apron, the tunic, that the Kohen would wear went down one's whole body until just a little bit above the heel. It says, wow, that's really long. For orech beis yad shela al pas yado, the sleeve would go down to one's palm. It's a little bit strange when you think about it. Like when we're wearing a jacket, my sleeves don't go down that far. So he says, you know what the idea is? He gives other examples, but it's late already. He says the idea is it's like almost outsized. Obviously, it has to fit the Kohen, and obviously the Kohen's garments would be fit to his specific body size. But the point is, it's even longer than you might have thought a garment would be, because it's supposed to stand out for him. Just a very interesting idea to think about. So we discussed the Sforno this morning about the dynamic of the special relationship cultivated between the Jewish people and God that is specifically highlighted in the Mishkan. We spoke about the Kli Yakar in terms of perspective on the altar, the inner altar that's specifically used on Yom Kippur. And we spoke about the Sefer HaChinuch's concept regarding the priestly garments.